Another thing on wind erosion is that we can start up cover crops. Another example of a real problematic field would be right after we harvest potatoes. Now, some of you been around potato country, you know what I'm talking about. Those that have never really been around a potato field, when you do harvest potatoes, it leaves virtually nothing on the ground surface. You know, the potatoes grow great big long vines, 6-8 feet long. But when they die, they desiccate into powder. And so you end up with virtually powdery organic material. It doesn't have any stem structure at all. It breaks down into very tiny cellular pieces. So you don't have stiff stems like you do with corn or with wheat or crops of that nature. So you just got that, when you till it, it just literally dissipates into fine particles. So it just becomes another potential air contaminant. As those vines dry up and get run over by the equipment, they become little teeny tiny particles. So we got to do something on a potato field just to get the field stabilized for the winter winds and the early spring winds. So oftentimes they go in and they'll plant a cover crop over the top of the field, and generally that's going to be wheat. You can buy wheat relatively cheap, and it's easy to get it germinated. It's a nice big seed that comes up pretty rapidly, and they'll try to get the wheat up high enough so that it will break that wind erosion cycle that occurs mainly during the winter and early spring in this part of the country. And that's really, you know, the months of March and April are our worst months for wind here in the Northwest. It's when our worst storms come through. And that's when the ground is most susceptible. Right now we can have heavy winds, but there's always moisture on the ground on days like today here in the later part of the year. And in the wintertime, we're okay, because it's always going to be wet enough that you're not going to have dust blowing. Not totally true. There will be days in the middle of the winter down in that Boardman area, you'll actually see a little dust blowing in the air sometimes. Not enough to be significant, but it can happen. It surely can happen in March and April, and it does happen. So we can put in a ground cover, irrigate it up. It's about the only way it's going to get growing in that desert country. It's not going to do it. You'll put seed out there on a dry field, nothing's going to happen. It just stays dry. But irrigate it up and get it going, and then oftentimes they will leave that stubble, go in that spring and spray it, and it might be up this tall, and they just spray it with Roundup and then drill right into that as a no-till practice, and you have a very stable condition for whatever crop you're going to put in. Oftentimes potatoes are followed up directly with field corn, and so they plant that field corn in April right into that dead short wheat stubble that you spray out, and you have an awful lot of good anchor for the ground. You're not going to have any wind erosion on that field.